So the title of this talk, What Do We Teach When We Teach Data Literacy, is intentionally ambiguous, and I'm going to attempt to answer this question from two perspectives. With a broad definition of we, looking at what educators in the disciplines, not librarians, but what educators in other fields teach when they teach data literacy. And then given what students are being taught in their classes in the disciplines that they are studying, what should librarians be teaching when we teach data literacy to best complement the data literacy instruction that is happening in the disciplines? And then I'll close with some pedagogical strategies for teaching these data literacy competencies. So a brief disclaimer here. I'm presenting based on my own work in this area, which is primarily based in the North American context. I'm interested in hearing from you all in the question and answer period about how applicable you think these ideas are in the South African context. But before we get into the question of what we are teaching when we teach data literacy, I'd like to take even one step further back and look at an even more fundamental question. What is data literacy? You'd think that for a set of skills that there seems to be really broad societal agreement that students and that people in general need to have, there'd be more agreement as to which skills fall under this umbrella of data literacy. But you'd be wrong. There are probably several dozen substantively different definitions of data literacy out there. If you try to break those definitions down into discrete competencies, you'll find quite a lot of categories of skills that various people think you need to have to be data literate. I could do an entire presentation on different definitions of data literacy, but to keep this concise, I'm going to focus on a tiny corner of data literacy definitions, ones from the Government of Canada. Canada has had a focus for several years on increasing the data literacy of the workforce in general and government employees in particular. And as part of that, they've had to try to figure out what skills exactly they're trying to increase. So these are the 18 data literacy competencies that are included in the data literacy training materials put out by Statistics Canada, the National Statistical Agency of Canada. And 18 seems like maybe kind of a lot of competencies, but I wouldn't necessarily quibble with many of the specific competencies listed here. If it were up to me, I might combine the two competencies that are about using data to make and evaluate decisions, but this seems like it basically covers data literacy. But then various researchers from the Canadian government have done some projects where they compared existing frameworks for data literacy out there, either in the published research literature or ones that were created by different non-governmental organizations as part of their goal to teach and increase data literacy. So these Canadian researchers gathered a bunch of these data literacy frameworks and competency-based definitions, pulled out all the different competencies listed in each framework, and then compared to see which competencies were included in each of the different works they're comparing. And these efforts have found a lot more than 18 different competencies that are showing up in different data literacy frameworks. So in 2019, 3 researchers with Statistics Canada's Analytical Studies branch compared 5 different sets of data literacy competencies, just 5, and found 27 different competencies between them. And only 5 of those competencies were shared between all 5 of the data literacy frameworks that they looked at. But luckily for librarians, 2 of these competencies that appeared in all 5 frameworks are squarely in librarians' wheelhouse. Discovery and evaluating sources are core competencies in information literacy. So if there is an agreement across data literacy competency frameworks that those are important things for people to learn how to do, and librarians already have lots of practice teaching students how to apply those skills to textual sources, then teaching students how to apply those skills to quantitative sources seems like potentially a very good place for librarians to contribute to data literacy instruction. The Government of Canada didn't stop there, though. A few years later, another Canadian government researcher, this time Stephen Downes from the National Research Council of Canada, compared 20 different data literacy competency frameworks in the published literature, and he found 40, that's 40, different data literacy competencies in the 20 different works he looked at. Unsurprisingly, when you're looking at competencies that are this granular, there wasn't a single competency that appeared in all 20 of the different frameworks that Downes examined. And also unsurprisingly, there are some overlaps with the previous analysis, since they looked at some of the same data literacy frameworks. But what intrigues me about Downs' analysis are the number of competencies that appeared in more than one framework that are core librarian skills, but not information literacy skills, as data discovery and data evaluation were on the previous slide. These get more at skills from the technical services side of librarianship, things like curation, preservation, and metadata. And Downs looked at these 40 competencies and how they tended to cluster, and indeed found that many of those technical services-like skills cluster in the data stewardship model of data literacy. He also found an information literacy cluster that emphasizes the parallels between the information literacy skills one needs for working with textual sources and the skills one needs for working with data sources. And I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn how many of the data literacy frameworks that fall into this cluster were written by practicing librarians and other people in the field of library and information science. So the point of that little tour through Canada's efforts to decide what data literacy means is that first, nobody really knows or agrees what it means. But secondly, and more importantly, there are at least two models of data literacy that are really clearly aligned with librarians' skills and values. An information literacy model aligned with the traditional reference and instruction side of librarianship, and a data stewardship model aligned with the technical services side of librarianship. So we've got something for everyone. Okay, so we have these two potential models. Do either or both of these models make sense as a way for librarians to approach data literacy instruction in their institutions? To answer that question, we need to know what educators in other fields in our institutions are doing. Librarians' efforts should be aligned with what educators in other fields are doing, or fill in the gaps with what they're doing, but we definitely don't want to contradict or work at cross purposes with what other educators are doing. So next, let's take a look at what educators in other fields are teaching when they teach data literacy. Let's start with statistics, as probably the most data-intensive field taught on many campuses. If you're going to find data literacy in the disciplinary curriculum, the statistics department seems like the place to look for it, right? So the American Statistical Association has guidelines for an undergraduate statistics curriculum, which contains a list of the core skills that they think undergraduate statistics majors should get from their education. And there isn't a lot here that looks like data literacy, right? We've got data management clearly called out. And if you read their descriptions of these, a few other data literacy competencies appear. The ability to create data visualizations, to use tools such as statistical software to work with data, to communicate data verbally, data ethics. Those all appear in the descriptions of these points. But neither of those librarian-friendly clusters of competencies, either the information literacy skills of finding and evaluating data, or the technical services skills of curating, preserving, and creating metadata for data, get a mention. But implicit in these guidelines is that some of that work is expected to happen in other disciplines. In this last bullet point, they're talking about disciplines other than statistics. The idea is that students who want to apply statistical methods to questions in biology or sociology or whatever discipline need to know about the accepted ways for asking questions, quantifying phenomena, and the like in that discipline, in order to be able to apply statistical techniques to research questions in that discipline appropriately. So maybe it's in these other disciplines that some of that in data literacy instruction is happening? Let's see. The American Political Science Association just this spring released a report called Rethinking Political Science Education. And political science is a very data-driven field these days, so it seems like a logical place to look for data literacy. And if you look at just the names of their 6 skill objectives for political science majors, number 3 and number 5 look like they could be very much on point. But if you read the text that describes and expands on each of these, data literacy is nowhere to be found. The description for number 3 will warm the cockles of any librarian's heart. It's all about how information literacy is a critical skill and how political science faculty should partner with librarians to be sure that their students are information literate. And the word data doesn't appear anywhere in that section. And number 5 isn't much better. Data discovery gets a brief mention, and you might see some allusions to data evaluation if you really squint, but there's nothing at all about data curation, data preservation, data sharing, metadata, any of those skills. This description is really about teaching students to understand different empirical research methods and how to carry them out effectively and ethically. So I want to go back for a minute to the list of 27 competencies found by Bonakovska, San Martin, and Frenette in their comparison of 5 data literacy competency frameworks. From what we've seen in these 2 sets of curriculum guidelines, assuming that individual instructors are aligning their teaching with these guidelines, it doesn't look like disciplinary instructors are giving much, if any, attention to quite a few of these skills. There's a lot of emphasis on basic data analysis and data visualization, some emphasis on the other steps of the research method, like developing hypotheses and collecting data, plus data ethics and communicating data verbally. There's surprisingly little on the information literacy model of data literacy, so finding and evaluating data, and basically none on data curation, preservation, sharing, and metadata creation. That conclusion is just based on the published curriculum guidelines, but a colleague and I have a research project underway where we're looking at articles published in the statistics education literature, which are mostly statistics educators reporting on what they're doing with their classes and how well it worked. We aren't far enough along yet to be able to share any results, but I can say that based on the articles we've analyzed so far, I suspect that our final results are going to track this pretty closely. It looks like statistics faculty, or at least the statistics faculty who are publishing about their teaching, are largely teaching in accordance with the ASA guidelines. So there's lots that librarians could teach when we get the opportunity to teach data literacy to our institution students. But that makes my next question even more important. Given everything that we could teach, what should we teach? Which of these long lists of data literacy competencies that apparently aren't being covered much in disciplinary classes are the most important ones for students to learn and for us to teach? And then how should we teach them? And I would argue that there is no single answer to this question that will be right for everyone. As I see it, the most important question to think about when deciding what data literacy skills you should teach is, which of those skills are going to be most important to your students? For students who are at different points in their education, who are studying different subjects, who are headed into different careers, there are different data literacy competencies that are going to be important to them. For example, the data curation model of data literacy. So this was one of the first published models of data literacy. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, a group of American academic librarians led by Jake Carlson, who was at Purdue University at the time, interviewed 19 faculty about how they, and more importantly their graduate students, worked with data. And then Carlson and his collaborators came up with a list of the data skills that graduate students in the natural sciences and engineering, the fields that they were studying, needed. And their list included things we've seen before, like data analysis and visualization, but it also emphasized these data curation skills. Due to the kind of research that people in these fields are doing, very data-driven, very computationally intensive, and due to the environment in which they were doing it, in which there are legal mandates from funders, mandates from journals, mandates from other places, to preserve and share data to facilitate reproducible research. It's obvious that for this group of students, data curation is a critical set of skills that graduate students often are not being taught, and that librarians are well positioned to teach. And you can probably expand that conclusion to students who are doing graduate work in other academic fields, things like the quantitative social sciences, and even students who are headed for jobs in business, where they will be responsible for managing data from their firm. So especially students majoring in things like business analytics or data science or similar fields. But does an undergraduate sociology student who hasn't decided yet what she wants to do after graduation need those data curation skills in the same way? Probably not. Although it's important that some people in society have the curation-related data literacy competencies, They aren't necessarily something that everybody is going to be called on to do, so not something that everybody needs. So I want to finish up this talk by talking about some data literacy skills that I would argue everybody needs, and also some ways to approach teaching them. And I would argue that the data skills that all students need are the ones that fall under the heading of critical data literacy. So what is critical data literacy? The late British statistician George Box might be best known for his quote that all models are wrong, but some are useful. Box was trying to emphasize that mathematical models aren't a 100% faithful view of the world, that they're intentionally very simplified, and that yet a person can still draw useful and reliable conclusions about the real world when working inside the highly stylized perspective of a mathematical model. And this is equally true when you're talking about data. Flattening the complicated, messy, three-dimensional world into the rows and columns of a spreadsheet never fully and accurately captures the world. Imagine a person who is handed a quantitative summary of themselves. It may contain things like their age, their blood pressure, their cholesterol level, their annual income, their school test scores. This list of easily quantifiable and often quantified variables about a person could go on and on. But no matter how many variables were included, I don't think anybody would ever feel like such a spreadsheet captured their essence, their personality, who they really are. So just like a mathematical model presents a simplified view of the world that omits much information, but that nevertheless can be useful in helping to explain or predict things in the world, data is always also a simplified view of the world that omits much information, but that can, when handled and interpreted correctly, still tell us something useful. For example, you can, from a fairly simple quantitative summary of a person like the one I just described, make a pretty good prediction of things like how likely they are to develop heart disease, for example. The data might be quote unquote wrong in that it doesn't fully describe the person, or in that some of the variables might be difficult to measure precisely, or that people might reasonably disagree on how they should be measured, but it can still be useful. So if you acknowledge that data, all data, is in some sense quote unquote wrong, and that it's never raw, it's never fully and faithfully capturing the world, then understanding how the data is quote unquote cooked is really, really important. Data doesn't just fall from the sky. People with all of their biases and goals and preconceived ideas, they go out and measure things or they count things. And all of the time they're making choices. Choices like what to omit from a data set and what to include, what categories to use to classify things, how you operationalize a particular concept into something you can actually measure, even things like what sensors to use to capture data. So if you're trying to draw conclusions from a particular data set, it's really important to understand what choices were made by the people who created the data and how those choices shape what you see in the data. And this is what critical data literacy is all about. Understanding data as something that was created by humans who are bringing all of their preconceived notions about the world, their biases, the social and economic environment that they live in, all of it, to the process of data creation, and understanding that all of those things impact the process of data creation. You can incorporate that critical data literacy perspective into data literacy instruction when you're teaching almost any data literacy competency. But I'm going to focus on the 4 competencies listed on this slide. Data discovery can be a great place to introduce critical data literacy concepts because of the way that data is typically disseminated. For books and articles, we have these big aggregators that are based on format. Library catalogs for books, article databases, tools such as Google Scholar. But when searching for data, there are many fewer one-stop shopping options, so students often have to go directly to the source, the agency or the research group that generated the data. So they have to think about questions like, who both would be interested in generating this data that I want, and also would have the resources to generate that data, because generating data isn't cheap, right? So this is a great opportunity to introduce the ways that social and economic factors influence data creation, because in many cases you have a very black and white outcome. Either it was in somebody's interest to create the data that the student wants, and that group had the resources to create the data set, so the data exists, or the data does not exist because nobody who cares about that particular question has had the resources to create that data. And of course, the resources to create data sets aren't randomly distributed in the world. So you can get into some really interesting information literacy concepts about whose view of the world gets expressed in the data that is created, and whose view of the world is missing from the data that is available to us, while also helping students to understand where and how they can most productively go about looking for data sets to use in their research. In getting into data interpretation and data evaluation, even if someone had both the interest and the resources to create a particular data set, how they created it, the choices that went into creating that data set, likely reflects their interests and their resources as well. So this is a chance to talk with students about what variables are included in this data set, what variables are not included. Why do you think the creators chose to include these variables and not those variables? Or why do you think the creators chose to sort people into these categories, but not those categories? And then how do those choices about which variables to include and how to categorize people affect what you can do with the data set? The questions of which variables are included and which categories are used are ones that students need to think about to decide whether a data set is fit for purpose, even if they aren't thinking about why those particular choices were made. So since you already need to talk about those things when evaluating a data set, why not go a little bit deeper and talk about the why as well? Understanding why data exists as it does not only will help give students a better understanding of what data exists and where to go look for it, the basic competency of data discovery, but it also helps to empower them as data users and potentially as future data creators themselves. So much of how data gets created has been so normalized. We do it this way because we've always done it this way. So getting students to think about, well, why have we always done it this way? Whose interests are being served by doing it that way? Do we want to serve those interests? That can be really empowering to students who, as young adults, tend to be at the age where they're looking to make change in the world, to change the world for the better. You might be surprised to see data visualization on this slide, since it fits neither of the two criteria I was talking about earlier. It's not something that's particularly clearly in librarians' area of expertise, and it's something that appears to be covered in both statistics classes and many other disciplinary classes in quantitative fields. But if you are ever, as a librarian, called upon to teach data visualization tools to a class, and since many disciplines recognize data visualization as being an important skill for students, this is something that librarians are frequently called upon to do in my experience. This is one of my favorite ways to teach critical data literacy for two reasons. First, it's very approachable for students who might be a little bit afraid of math. I don't know how many math-phobic students you encounter in your work, but I see them very frequently. And as soon as you put a spreadsheet full of numbers in front of them, their mind just goes blank, right? That's not how they think. But if you put a data visualization, an image in front of them, they can work with that. And secondarily, data visualization lets you very easily put them in the role of creator. The idea that data is created by humans and human choices impact what you see in the data set can be kind of abstract sometimes, especially for students who haven't yet actually had to do any data gathering themselves. But with all of the very easy point-and-click data visualization tools that are out there today, it's so easy to have a group of students whip up data visualizations using the same data set, and then have them compare, and see how many different stories you can make the same data tell, depending on the choices that you make when creating your visualization. Because that's really the point, right? Not just of data literacy, but of information literacy more broadly. To think of information, including quantitative information, not just as something that falls from the sky, as nuggets of unquestionable truth, and not just, to quote American author Mark Twain, as lies, damned lies, and statistics, end quote, either, but as something that's constructed. And you, students, voters, everybody, are empowered to see how it was constructed and to see if that seems to you like a reasonable, valid way to generate information that speaks to the question that you're currently exploring. That's the heart of critical data literacy. And I hope I've convinced you that it's both worthwhile and not that difficult to incorporate more critical data literacy into the work that you do with students. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. And